3 minutes. C'est OK pour la vidéo?
And this is not on, right?
No, not
Okay.
close.
Cool.
And the video is starting. It's okay.
Okay. Okay, we will get started. Hello? Are you having a good time? Yes. Good. So today I'm going to talk about the HiPPO, highest paid person's opinion, why it is damaging and what we can do about it. But before I get started, I just want to get an indication of the sort of organizations you guys work in. So I have a question for you guys, and the question is, so how many layers do you have in your organization from a developer all the way up to the CEO? So for some of you, this might be a bit difficult to work out, so I'll give you half a minute to work it out. So how many layers do you have from a developer to the CEO? One minute. Just give some time. Just a second. We'll start by having everyone's hands up. So I have everyone's hands up, okay? Okay, now put your hand down if you only have 1 or 2 layers. Put your hand down if you only have 1 or 2 layers. Okay, so this is where actually the developer is the CEO or the founder of the organization, or they're directly reporting into the CEO. Okay, that's not so bad actually. So put your hand down if you only have 3 to 4 layers. Okay, some hands coming down. 5 to 6. Put your hand down if you have 5 to 6 layers. Okay. 7 or 8. Put your hand down. Wow, those of you left, do you have more than 8 layers then? How many? 9?
At least 10.
At least 10, okay. So those of you you're left, I think you may need a group therapy afterwards, so yeah. So why am I asking this? So well, the more layers you have, the more HiPPOs you're likely to have. So hence the more HiPPO effect. And of course, you can still observe the HiPPO effect within the same level, within a team level. That's also possible. But this is also an indication of like how fast your feedback loops are likely to be and how frequent contact you are to have with the most senior decision maker in your organization. And if you don't have frequent feedback loops with your senior decision makers, when you do have the contact, then you're more likely to get in the headlights, get caught in the headlights. And this also indicates how many layers do the information need to filter through, or the decisions need to filter through. So I want to start by telling you a story. A few years ago, I was working in a Fortune 500 company, quite large company. So say 7 layers between a business analyst all the way up to the CEO. We had 20,000 employees around the world and more than 300 offices. It was a global operation. And to be fair, we were good at what we did. In fact, we were the market leader. However, there was a slight problem. The experience we delivered to our customers was not so good. We had a lot of manual processes and bureaucracies that we made pretty much our customers do for us. So our processes were easy and efficient for us and not for our customers. unfortunately. And in addition to this, we were actually very slow. And we interviewed our customers. When we asked them what sort of animal we were like as a company, they would say, we're like an elephant, because we were so slow. And I promise, I'm not obsessed with large mammals, you know. I quite like the hippos, but yeah. Anyways, having been on the front line, I knew this problem back to front. I was working in customer service. I knew that the systems we had were broken, and we knew that we had to do something about this. So I was on the small team that came up with the vision of where we wanted to get to. So we started working on a business case. We wanted to transform the customer experience. We wanted to make it easier for us to do, for our customers to do business with us. And our customers would be delighted, and if they're delighted, they're more likely to give us more business, and that would increase revenue, and eventually that would increase profits. Sounds easy, right? Well, lots of assumptions. And to get the required investment, of course, we needed buy-in from the board. So we needed a sponsorship at the C-level. And now, these are very busy people, right? Very important people, thousands of employees reporting into them. They're quite used to getting what they want, and they're used to getting what they want quickly. And this was not a small decision, though. We were talking about investing in a new platform to deliver this whole new experience, tens of millions of dollars and hundreds of people required. And it was also very risky because we had a terrible track record of delivering IT projects in the company, failed IT projects over and over again. And to really complicate things, this change was very urgent from the perspective of the person, the sponsor who was asking for it, because she was under pressure to deliver. The company had been making a loss for the last couple of years, and we had to do something very quickly. So of course, she transferred that pressure onto us, and we were asked to come up with a plan to deliver this whole customer experience within 9 months. So we were instructed to come up with a plan. And of course, we went back and did our analysis, and our initial assessment was that it was going to take at least twice as long. And on top of this, we pointed out that there was a massive uncertainty about the value we were setting out to deliver. And you can imagine it took a lot of guts to tell this to her face, and she wasn't very happy, I can tell you that. And in fact, unfortunately, she ignored our advice, and the reaction we got was, maybe you're not the right person to lead this effort. Yes, we just got squashed by the HiPPO, so highest paid person's opinion. And sometimes this can be subtle and unintentional, but sometimes it's very direct and intentional. Either way, HiPPO can be a dangerous animal in product development. This story doesn't have a happy ending, I'm afraid. Not only did the initiative burn through $60 million, it took more than twice as long as we actually initially suggested. The time frames weren't the real problem, though. What we delivered actually added very little value in the end. It was a huge waste of time, money, and people's talent, I'm afraid. So let me ask you guys, does this sound familiar to you guys? Do you have any? Okay, so there are lots of noddings, okay. That's fine. Well, it should sound familiar. This is basically the slightly more subtle and corporate version of the Emperor's New Clothes, right? So the HiPPO makes a decision, and you know they are all mostly treated by they are treated as corporate royalties. Okay, so that was my story, but let's have a look at another public example. This guy looks very happy. Do you know who he is? Yes, everyone knows, of course, Jeff Bezos. the founder, CEO of Amazon. So how many of you here have bought a book from Amazon? I'm not sure. Okay, lots. Perfect. That's good. So there was an article in Forbes recently, and they were praising the way Amazon approached innovation. And this is what they said. A culture of experimentation, leaders at all levels are encouraged to test ideas in the marketplace. Let data, not senior leadership opinions, guide implementation. Sounds pretty good, right? But it seems not even Amazon are immune to the HiPPO effect. So let me ask you another question. How many of you here own an Amazon Fire Phone? No. Do you know anyone who has an Amazon Fire Phone? Have you ever seen one? Okay. No. So according to an inside story, the Fire Phone was a classic episode of HiPPO-driven decision-making. Jeff Bezos was involved in every little decision throughout the development. And he was very, very excited about this feature, which was called dynamic perspective, but no one understood why. No one understood why he was so excited. And when someone asked the team why they were working on this feature, they would say, because Jeff wants it. Interesting, right? Eventually, the Amazon Fire Phone was seen as Amazon's biggest misstep, after a decade of success, of course. And the Wall Street Journal review was scathing, gimmicks without much real-world usage, unfortunately. So if you hear anyone say in one of your, because the HiPPO once said, if you hear this in any of your projects or in your organization, you will definitely want to train your HiPPO. It's not that the HiPPO is always wrong. After all, they're experienced people, they're senior, they know, right? They know some stuff. More concerning is that the HiPPO-driven decision-making hides critical assumptions about the value and the urgency of the things that we're working on. That is the real problem. So how many of you here have been on a project where the deadline was set by the HiPPO? Plucked out of the air, just randomly? Okay, lots of you. So estimates turn into negotiations, and those negotiations eventually become commitments, right? That's how it happens. And senior executives love setting stretched deadlines out there. And it's kind of the accepted wisdom that that's what senior execs do, after all. We expect them to do that. Unfortunately, these are all false constraints which back us into a corner and can do untold damage in the end. And sometimes the HiPPO effect can be quite unintentional. You don't know actually the impact of the HiPPO-driven decision-making on the organization. So one of the chief marketing officers that I worked with in the US, she was walking in the corridor of the organization, and she saw an early prototype of this feature that she really liked. And she casually said, "Oh, that's cool. You know, can we have that by January?" What she didn't realize was that then that January date became a deadline, which was repeated throughout the organization, like the Chinese whispers, a corporate version of Chinese whispers. And suddenly, people were bending over backwards to make that happen, diverting resources from one project to another, working late hours, cutting corners on quality. She simply didn't realize the impact that she was having. So either way, as you can see, HiPPO is a dangerous animal in product development. So what about this guy? Does anyone know who he is? Ron Johnson. He is the mastermind behind Apple Retail Store Experience. He oversaw the launch of Apple stores and the unbelievable success. In fact, by 2012, Apple was making more than $6,000 for every square foot of store space. That's even like a lot more than Tiffany's, more than double actually. So, Ron Johnson left Apple to join JCPenney in 2012. And he wanted to transform JCPenney from a discount retail store to the Selfridges of Middle America. I don't know if you heard of Selfridges in the UK. It's a very, it's a department store that sells a lot of expensive and luxuries brands, designer brands and so on. So like many senior executives, Johnson applied the very same thinking and the same approach that had worked for him in the past. He was so convinced that it was going to work, he ignored any advice that told him that it wasn't going to work. He even ignored the expert advice from the retail stars of Topshop and J.Crew, unfortunately. And Johnson liked to tell employees that there were two kinds of people, believers and skeptics. And he only wanted to have believers, like he had in Apple. So he ignored any kind of pushback. And when employees tried to convince him, they got nowhere, basically. Well, what happened in the end is sales went down by 25% and shares went down by 45%. So essentially, Johnson was so convinced that his strategy was right, he squashed everyone else. And he wanted JCPenney and its shoppers to be something that they weren't. He wanted them to be like Apple customers. He refused to recognize that the context was different, the profile of the customers were different, and the business model was different in the end. Eventually, his epistemic arrogance about what good look like led to disaster for JCPenney. So all of these stories, the failed project I worked on, the Amazon Fire Phone, and Johnson at JCPenney, they would be funny if they weren't true. So in each case, part of the failure is due to the HiPPO-driven decision making. And before these failures, these guys were actually treated, they were treated as corporate royalties. So in hindsight, we know their strategies were wrong, but up until that moment, we didn't know. They were considered geniuses and masters of their own domain. So indeed, HiPPO can be a dangerous animal in product development. Okay, lots of stories. Now it's your turn, so I would like to hear your stories.
I have a question.
Yes?
Is that okay too? So there are a lot of HiPPO stories about Apple and Steve Jobs, where we praise him and Apple for bringing us the iPhone in exactly this way. So I fully agree with your examples, and I've seen this, and I've been working with HiPPOs to help them get rid of this behavior, etc. So I do think you're going in a good direction. But aren't we just in hindsight interpreting reality in terms of like, so if Jeff Bezos would have been successful with his phone, everybody would go like, yeah, 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 and Forbes would say, see what a good leader looks like? And he didn't hurt Amazon, right? He can afford to go yeah on his bike like a 9-year-old. And because he can, he might create something awesome. So is it really a good idea to totally stop this?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of public stories that are actually failures, but there are also, that's why I want to hear your stories as well. I'm sure you will have a lot of examples of the HiPPO-driven decision making. I'm not saying the HiPPO is always wrong. We definitely have geniuses like Steve Jobs who actually, who are exceptions, I would say.
No, take this other smart thing he had in the 90s. What was that called? Watson? No. Newton? And if he hadn't invented the iPhone later, we would look at the Newton thing now as we look at the Fire phone. So it's just like some people are exceptionally daring and they sometimes fail. There's this nice quote in the new Brené Brown book which says, something favors the bold. Fortune favors the bold, is a saying in English, and failure does too.
Okay.
So if people are exceptionally bold, they will sometimes create amazing new things and sometimes spectacular failures. But does that mean we should stop them from being bold?
No, of course not. It's just that you need to run small experiments perhaps to minimize the risk of failure. So there are things that we can do in order to minimize the failure. But that's not the point of this talk. So now I would like to hear your experience of HiPPO-driven decision making. Maybe there are some positive ones, that's fine as well. Share with your neighbor your experience. Do you have any examples where the highest paid person's opinion dominated a decision? Share with your neighbor. Okay, anyone who would like to share their stories? Any good stories? Any volunteers? There's one, I guess.
Right, I'm Stefan. I work in retail, and last 2 weeks ago, two of our HiPPOs just say to our team of developers that we have to launch the new fidelity program for the 1st of March. That was just, you have to launch it for the 1st of March. We don't have asked you if you can, but you have to. And we know you can't. And you told us you can't, but you have to do it. And if you do not agree, that's exactly the same thing, because we told everybody that we'll launch the 1st of March, so you have to do it. Deal with it, and let's meet on the 1st of March.
Okay.
Sounds familiar?
Okay, there's another one, I guess.
I met a guy, he was my boss, in fact, and he actually told me, okay, we would need to go for a trial, really, but I just can't do it. And that's my question is, certain HiPPOs, do they really can be any training?
Okay. Anything else? Wait, there's one more.
The HiPPO I'm thinking of is a customer of ours, and because he requests vanity projects, essentially. It precludes people being able to meaningfully work on those projects, because unless you share his enthusiasm for those vanity projects, you're not going to have connection with that work.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so hopefully you were able to share some stories with your neighbors. So what can we do actually about the highest paid person's opinion? Perhaps there are some things that we can do in order to minimize or contain the HiPPO effect. So we need to start by understanding our context first. So I asked you guys, how many layers do you have in your organization, from a developer to the CEO? So answering that question, you would understand whether you have a flat consensus context or whether you're getting squashed by HiPPOs all the time. And the other thing is basically to understand your culture. So there's a great study by Times Magazine in 2006. They asked 500,000 people, should the boss have all the answers? And as you can see, you can there is a varying, there is a difference in attitude to HiPPO effect. And this correlates with Hofstede's power distance index. Have you heard of Hofstede? Yes, some of you, yeah. So they analyze different country cultures based on 5 different dimensions. And one of the dimensions is the power distance index. And if you have a low power distance index in your country, it means that you're more likely to challenge your hierarchy. So if you're living in countries like New Zealand or Denmark, as an employee, you expect the decisions to be transparent, and you expect to be involved in decision making. Whereas if you're in a high power distance index country, like China, India, or Turkey, where I'm from, and apparently France is one of them as well, you're less likely to challenge your hierarchy. And the information is shared selectively in these cultures, and in fact, the employees expect to be told what to do. So it's different. So how do we actually train our HiPPOs? So there are 5 tactics which I'm going to talk you through very quickly. And you need to choose what might work for your context and inspect and adapt. And if it doesn't work, you can pick another one. And I'm happy to hear about different tactics as well. So the first one is making the problem visible. So this is about increasing the awareness of our HiPPO about the problems we see, but they may not be able to see. A good example of this is to measure and make visible how long it takes to deliver new ideas or new features, improvement ideas. So at my former company, we did a cycle time analysis. So we measured how long it takes from an idea to having that idea launched in production. So you're trying to analyze the end-to-end cycle time. And once you make this visible to your senior executives or to the people who are involved in decision making, you can then ask, what would good look like for our company? And in here, we actually suggested that anything that less than 90 days was actually a good target for us to start with. So another great hack is basically to make visible how much work in progress there is in your pipeline. In this case, as you can see, there's a lot going on before prioritization. So upstream of prioritization is full of a lot of analysis in progress. And what we try to pay attention here is basically, we try to draw the attention to the funding and governance process that was impacting the pipeline. And in this case, it was taking a lot of time to get to the point of prioritization. And this helped us to make the case for changing the funding and governance model in the end. Another favorite of mine is a sorely underused tool. I quite like this, value stream maps. Have you guys used value stream maps? Yes, most of you. Well, we're in a lean Kanban conference. I'm guessing that that's quite normal. So what I love about value stream maps is that how different people's perception of the process would be. So how it actually works and how it is intended to work. It can be very, very different, right? So, and this is not so difficult to do, right? So take a small number of features that you have delivered in the last release and map back the timeline. So take one of them, a couple of them, and see where the weighting is, see where the cues are. And then you can then make a suggestion as to how to improve that. So what we are making visible here is basically how long it's taking and what the waiting time is. The second useful tactic I find is the art of asking questions instead of telling. Edgar Schein defines this as the humble inquiry. So to do this, you need to access your ignorance and ask questions in the least biased and least threatening way. So it is about inquiring in a way that increases the chances of capturing what is on the other person's mind. So why does this work? It works because asking temporarily empowers the other person. So in this case, you're empowering the HiPPO. And once you empower the HiPPO, you make yourself vulnerable. And when you make yourself vulnerable, you empower them to lower their defenses. And it is also about sidestepping your ego and the ego of the HiPPO. Even better, if you can try to frame it as you're asking for help. You're not trying to tell them anything, you're trying to ask for help to understand something. So this could be about the market, this could be about the project that you're working on, or the risk of the features that you're delivering. It could be about anything. And try to use words that respectfully emphasize their knowledge and their experience. You can use words like this: I'm a bit lost on something, I'm hoping you can help me. You're the one that is most experienced in our customers, you know what they want. Can you help me understand what this really means? What's the value here? And so on. So humble inquiry actually opens the door to building trusting relationships. Because when you make yourself vulnerable, you empower the other person to help you or to hurt you. That's the interesting bit. The trust builds on your side because you have asked for help and they haven't taken advantage of you. And the trust builds on the HiPPO's side because you have asked for help and you're listening to what they have to say and you're opening up his own ideas with your questions. You're paying attention, basically. So that's how you can use the art of asking questions. The third tactic is the rule of three, which was defined by Virginia Satir. And this is about considering at least 3 options when making decisions. You can use the rule of 3 when you're discussing something or when you're facilitating a workshop or anything. For instance, you could make it a standard practice that when you're making a decision that you will at least consider 3 alternatives. The other way you can use this is basically when you're slicing a minimum viable product, you can encourage people to think about at least 3 options to slice the MVP. And this would actually allow you to diverge a bit before you converge onto one option. And rule of 3 encourages you to use minimum of divergent thinking before you converge. So in a project that I worked on, we have applied this thinking. The HiPPO basically dictated that we need to be delivering a fully automated booking solution in 3 months. So instead of going head-to-head with the HiPPO and challenging him back, saying it can't be done, we basically went back and worked out some options. And we presented back to the HiPPO. So there were 3 options. First one was the manual workflow solution, which was triggered on the website by the customer, and then it was followed by a manual workflow at the back end. The second option was a semi-automated solution where some workflow steps were manual and some were automated. And the third one was the fully automated, the HiPPO solution that he had asked us to deliver. And then once we worked out all the options, we asked the delivery team to estimate the duration of how long it was going to take. And we actually estimated the value of these 3 options as well. And then we presented back to the HiPPO. And once we worked out the options, actually, we realized that the last responsible moment for C, the option C, had already expired. And given the return on investment figures, the HiPPO actually went for option B because it had more value than option A, but it also took less time compared to option C. So without the confrontation, we were able to actually provide 3 options, and he was able to make an informed decision on this. So try to use rule of 3 in every kind of decision that you're trying to make. It could be about slicing an MVP, or it could be about development options, as we had discussed in this example here. So the 4th tactic is another one that I really like and I find very useful, is the parallel thinking. Have any of you used Edward de Bono's 6 hats? Okay, lots, that's great. Cool. So, well, for the others, I can quickly explain what it is. So the traditional, more natural way of thinking is basically, or the more traditional way of discussing is to go head to head. And this traditional thinking was originated in Greece. And this is how philosophers actually debated ideas. So you use critical thinking to argue your point, and you would expect the other person to argue against. So you would argue why it will work, and they would argue why it won't work. You're going head to head. This is about adversarial confrontation. Or you can use information and data to go against someone's feelings or intuition. So the problem is that when we think, we're trying to do too much all at the same time. We're trying to absorb what the other person is saying, we're trying to judge, and we're trying to come up with new ideas. So it is quite a lot. So basically, we're not listening. Whereas in contrast, if we use parallel thinking, it encourages us to consider different perspectives sequentially. So you're not trying to go head to head, you're actually exploring different perspectives wearing different hats. And each hat represents a different perspective. So the white one is about information and data. You can ask the person what information, what sort of data we have on this topic. And then together you're exploring why this idea may work. And then together you're exploring why it may not work, and so on. So of course, in a group setting, you can still have the HiPPO effect as the dominant opinion, and that's possible. But if you use parallel thinking, you're less likely to end up in a situation like this. Well, the HiPPO makes a decision, right? And no one speaks up, and suddenly we're blindly following the HiPPO, and no one questions the decision that was on the table. Has this happened to you guys? Okay, yes. So at least if you're using 6 hats, you're trying to minimize this effect in the group setting. And it could be a very easy tool to use and to implement when you're facilitating discussions. You can use individual hats separately, or you can design your own sequences to achieve specific outcomes. So in this case, for instance, we asked the team, should we scale up our team to deliver this in 9 months? And we explored this idea using 6 hats sequentially exploring all different perspectives. Another version of parallel thinking is actually the ritual descent. Have you heard of ritual descent? Okay, there's one person. You can ask Olaf for help afterwards. So Dave Snowden talks about ritual descent. It's a formal method designed to test ideas, proposals, anything. So what happens is that you have a person who is presenting the idea, and the group receives the idea in silence. And then afterwards, the person who presented turns his or her back, and the rest of the group is now attacking the idea or suggesting alternative options to the idea. And we're trying to depersonalize by turning our back to the group. We're not trying to take this personal. And ritual descent forces us to explore the negative aspects of the idea, making our ideas much more stronger in the end. And have you guys used the retrospective questions, actually, the 4 retrospective questions? What went well? What could be differently? Okay, so that's a good example of parallel thinking, where you're exploring all 4 different aspects at separate times and discussing all the perspectives. Okay, so sometimes the best way to challenge the HiPPO could be to engage the analytical part of their brain. So Daniel Kahneman talks about System 1, System 2 thinking. I'm not sure if you have heard of it. Yeah, so he has a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. There are 2 different types of thinking. System 1 is based on gut feel, our gut feel about something, and intuition about something. And System 2 is about data and analysis, basically. So the gut and intuition of our HiPPOs can be wrong. Here is one of the HiPPOs that I worked with for a long time, and he has been in his position for the last 20 years. So he has a good knowledge about his domain, and he's got all the experience he needs. So this is one of the first prioritization meetings we had, and we were trying to prioritize 20 requirements for the next release. So we took all the requirements and we're trying to rank order, and he took one of them and said, this is the most important. And you know what? No one in the room challenged him, because everyone else in the room is actually the product owners who are reporting into him. So he's kind of the chief product owner. So what happened was, 2 hours later, that number 1 requirement was actually number 9 on the list. The reason why was we were actually using an economic framework to discuss our ideas and sharing our assumptions about the value and urgency of our ideas. So no more HiPPO prioritization. We were considering the cost of delay of our features, of our ideas. So to help HiPPOs and the others think about this, I tell them that I have a magic wand in my bag which instantly delivers the product they want, right? And then I follow up with a few questions. What would it be worth to us if we had this product right now? How much money are we making? How much are we saving? And sometimes there might be some nominal delivery dates, and that's fine. In that case, I ask the following 2 questions. What would it be worth to us if we had it 1 month earlier? Does this make a difference? Or you can actually turn the question around and ask, what would it cost us if we got it 1 month later? So this helps structure the conversation. And then we used a benefit framework in order to help them think about value. Because value can be such a nebulous term, you need some sort of scaffolding to help structure our discussion with them. So we had 4 different types of benefit buckets, 2 on the revenue side and 2 on the cost side, which helped us discuss our ideas and share our assumptions about value. And then we actually started by asking why. Okay, we have this feature, why should we do this? But then why should we do that? So we asked why enough times in order to get to the bottom of the benefits. So until we identified one of these 4 buckets, we kept asking why. And along the way, having done this with many organizations, many teams, we have discovered something about value that really surprised us. So this is one of the backlog of one of our teams that we worked with, and we introduced cost of delay. And as you can see, the top 25% of the requirements are at least 1,000 times more valuable than the bottom 25%. And in fact, if you look at the distribution, if you plot it on the chart, there are a small number of features that have a very high cost of delay onto the organization. So huge impact on the organization. And having done this with many teams, as I said, we have seen the same shape over and over again. So you can try this when you go back to your organizations and try an experiment. Start by asking, each person on one of your projects, what would you estimate the cost of delay for this project to be? And don't be surprised if you get different answers. We have a terrible gut feeling about this kind of thing, and we are making terrible trade-off decisions on a daily basis, unfortunately. So, introducing cost of delay helps surface assumptions, and then we can actually go and design experiments to test those assumptions. So it helps us to engage the system to thinking. So I talked about 5 different tactics. And as I said, pick one of them, experiment with it, and if it doesn't work, pick another one and try new ways of training your HiPPO. And what matters is that we start trying in the end. So 5 ways is basically you can make the problem visible, you can try the gentle art of asking questions, you can use the rule of 3 when you're making decisions or when you're coming up with proposals. You can use parallel thinking, especially in a group setting, which is quite easy to implement, and engage the system to thinking to discuss value and urgency of our ideas. So one last thought. Well, it's more of a warning, actually. So have a look around you. If you are not already, you will, one day, you will find yourself in a position where your opinion will be the highest paid person's opinion. So the question is, what are you going to do about this? So cute and harmless today, but maybe dangerous tomorrow, right? So will you remember how it was like to deal with a HiPPO? And what are you going to do about it? With great power comes great responsibility. So be aware that there are so many cognitive biases crippling in product development. Lots of biases, like confirmation bias, epistemic arrogance, group thinking. So these are all biases that we have to deal with ourselves. So perhaps this is why so many IT projects fail. Perhaps this is why so many startups fail. So what are we going to do? So remember very well what it was like. Be aware of your limitations, be aware of the biases, and in the end, don't be a hypocrite. Thank you. On time? We have time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Any questions?
Because it's your conclusion, if I'm an HiPPO, how can I train myself? Like the dragon,
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's the thing, right? It's easy to criticize the HiPPO, but actually we need to realize that we are dealing with the same challenges. So it's about understanding and empathizing with that challenge that they are facing.
So what's your 5 rules or 5 exercise if I'm there?
It's the same. It's the same. I mean, if, instead of like making decisions, for instance, yourself, if you're the product owner, are there any product owners here? Okay. I mean, I'm working as a product lead myself, so it's good to, for instance, in a group setting, use some of these tactics instead of like relying on your own decision. Ask your team to actually invalidate your assumption as quickly as possible. Communicate what assumptions you have about the value and urgency of the products that you're working on, and ask them to invalidate. So it's very counterintuitive, but we can at least start trying.
Hi. In fact, 2 minutes, HiPPO, is it an individual struggle in a company, or it's a culture in a company and a policy in one company?
Mm-hmm. Well, good question. I mean, it could be anything really, depending on your company culture and how many hierarchies you have. You're more likely to have HiPPOs, basically, and depends on your country culture as well. So, I mean, in my culture, where I'm from, it's very easy to expect that the boss is always right. No one challenges the boss, basically. So it could be both ways. It could be an individual, it could be the company culture, where the decisions are made through HiPPO decisions, or it could be yourself even, that you need to deal with your biases. Anything else? Okay. Still have 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks. Should we take this off? Do we need to take this off as well?
Wait.
I'll wait. Okay.
It's not me. I don't